All right. Good morning, everybody. Greetings from Singapore. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're looking at us, listening to us. Thank you for being here. I'm very happy to be with you again to present one more webinar. And today I'm going to be talking about biofeedback and neurofeedback for trauma. So we wanted to talk to you about the possibilities that biofeedback and neurofeedback have for trauma interventions if you're interested in getting into this wonderful world of neuroscience and brain training. And the first question that obviously we have to ask is why we study trauma and why we work with trauma. Well, the answer is very simple, because most of us experience trauma. It's part of human life and part of human experience. Therefore, that's why we intervene on it and we look for technological evidence-based options to work with trauma. So it's good for you as a clinician, and it's good for your clients and your patients. Now, I always like to start this kind of presentation by talking about this very, very important study that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and a company called Kaiser Permanente did back between 1995 and 1997. The original purpose of this study was not to talk about trauma, but rather to conduct research on disease for the general population. And I think this was done in California. I don't know if it was nationwide. But what they ended up finding was that people's illnesses were related to trauma response, to the ACE, or adverse childhood experiences, as they ended up calling them. So what they found out is that as people were getting sick with diabetes or had more chronic conditions like cancer, gastrointestinal disorders, addiction, all sorts of public health issues. What they did as they were deep into the study was to discover that people's adverse childhood experiences, what we call today trauma, were closely related to their physical health. And that's why this study became really, really relevant. They then segmented the trauma people experience in different categories. And one of them was abuse, which they then subdivided into emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. And they designed a specific description of what each of those mean. So if you had emotional abuse, you were abused by a parent or an adult living with you. Physical abuse meant where you were pushed, grabbed, shoved, and sexual abuse, well, obviously you had some kind of sexual assault or sexual abuse experience at least once by an adult in your environment, or parents or step-parents. The same they did for household challenges, meaning your mother was treated violently, you witness your stepdad or your dad violently attack your mom. There was substance abuse in the household. There was at least one relative, one family member with mental illness. Your parents were separated or divorced, and it was not an amicable divorce. It was an aggressive, depressive divorce. And also at least one house member went to prison for violent crimes. So all of these things were impacting people and affecting not only their mental health, but also their physical health. They also had a category for neglect, and they divided that in emotional neglect and physical neglect. Not being hugged as a child, not being told I love you. So in things in that realm were affecting that. Now, they came up with this pyramid, which I think is very, very important, and it holds true to this day in the work that we do with trauma. If you're a mental health practitioner, whether you do EMDR, biofeedback, or you combine those interventions with biofeedback and neurofeedback, you will find that most of your clients are going to be placed at some point in this pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid, we see that it starts with trauma, so the traumatic event itself. Then the social conditions and the local context influence where you grow up, what kind of environment you grow up in will influence that. Then you have more trauma, more adverse childhood experiences on top of that. And that leads to disruptive neurodevelopment. So this is what starts a downfall for most, if not all, the clients and patients that we work with. There's a disruption in the neurodevelopment. They're not the same person they were previous to the trauma. That also creates an impairment at the social, cognitive, and environmental level, emotional level as well. So there is a disruption in their neurotypical ideal functioning. People become depressed, people become anxious, people develop PTSD. And for a high percentage of these folks, they will develop or they will adopt high-risk behaviors. Early pregnancy, sexual intercourse without any protection, getting into a gang, using and abusing substances. And that, of course, brings disease, disability, and obviously the impact on society. And for many of them, early death was quite common. So it all starts with trauma, and then it obviously can culminate with early death. At some point, most of us will see the clients that will come to seek our help and services when they're here in the adoption of higher health, of health risk behaviors. So when they're engaging in something that is not good for them, when something happens that makes them think about needing help, is when they come to see us. By then, the neurodevelopmental disruption will have taken place. And so that's when we can use these interventions to help these people out. Now, some of the common findings for the study in people with the ACEs, where alcoholism and alcohol abuse, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, where there was also a medical consequence of that, depression, fetal death during pregnancy, health-related reduction in quality of life, drug abuse, suicide attempts, and the list goes on and on and on. So this just goes to show how trauma negatively and aggressively impacts a person's quality of life, their physical health, their mental health, and their quality of life in general. Now, what's also important to talk about in this study is what the more ACEs, the more adverse childhood experience that somebody underwent, the more of these conditions they would present together. Some people just presented 1 or 2, some people presented with 5 or 6. And that was strongly correlated to the number of traumatic experiences you had during childhood. So from the moment you're born to your child, through your childhood, even teenage years, it's a crucial period in which if you experience trauma, it's going to mark you and it's going to change you. It's going to transform you into somebody different, somebody who you not truly are, somebody who's not doing well, somebody who's struggling. But the good news is that we can help. And biofeedback and neurofeedback are powerful, evidence-based, strong interventions for this purpose. Now, we're all exposed to trauma. Most of us are, if not to say all of us, are exposed to trauma at one point or another in our lives. Not everybody experiences trauma to the same degree. Some people will transcend into a PTSD diagnosis, which is more critical and more chronic. Some people will deal with trauma response throughout their lives, and it manifests in different ways. Some people will cope rather well. Even though the number is smaller, we need to understand why these individuals fare better when they undergo a traumatic experience. So there are a number of important factors and elements that determine that. The first one is the event itself. How threatening was the event? The more threatening the event, the more dangerous it is for your life or well-being, the more impact it will have on you. So how long does it last? The time, the duration of the trauma is important. How often does it happen? And then we can see on the pictures that there are different kinds of events that will increase the likelihood of a population being traumatized overall, such as dictatorships, economic crisis, childhood sexual abuse, and war. The more ongoing these types of events are, the more traumatized people will be down the road. And that's important to understand. Second, the context of the person's life at the time of a traumatic event. Who were you? How resilient or how not resilient were you at the time of a trauma? It's also very, very important. And when you're working with clients, it's very important that you collect this information. What was their environment like at the time they experienced the first trauma and the subsequent traumas in their lives? So factors that magnify the possibility of somebody being more traumatized and more ill or less healthy down the road are poverty, your health at the time of traumatic event, your socioeconomic status, the ability to access good food, the access to be in a healthy environment. So if you come from a dysfunctional environment, if you come from poverty, if you come from disadvantages, then you're gonna be more likely to be more traumatized down the road. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot help you. It just means that it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, the physical characteristics of the individual are also very, very, very important. And it means that some people are genetically more resilient to stressful events than others. Some people are lucky, they get good genes, and they have more natural resilience to life. But that's not all of us. That's actually only a handful of individuals in the population are more resilient. However, it's important to understand how the genetics play an influence on how the brains are wired and how they cope with adversity down the road. If you're strong, if you have better physical fitness, it's important because if you need to escape a dangerous situation, if you need to run away from a threat that could eventually end your life, the better prepared you are, the more physically fit you are, the more mentally strong you are. It's going to provide you with protective factors to, again, be better off down the road. So the person's age, their physiological development, their psychological makeup are very important at the moment of a traumatic event. But they're also important after the traumatic event because they can either facilitate or make the intervention and healing more difficult. Now, this PowerPoint slides has two very powerful pictures that I like always to talk about. On the left, we see an overweight person running away from a zombie. This is a snapshot from the movie Zombieland from 2007. And what I like about it is that one of the main actors, protagonists in the movie, starts providing the audience, starts narrating to the audience a set of rules to survive the zombie apocalypse. And he says, rule number 1 is cardio. And they open the movie. This is a high school football field. This is probably a high school student running away from the zombie. And as the chase is taking place, the narrator says, for when the zombie apocalypse came, for obvious reasons, the first ones to go were the fatties. And so beyond making fun of overweight people, that rule number 1 is cardio. And that struck a chord with me. So when I was preparing this presentation, the first thing that came to mind was that scene. And that's why I put the picture there. Now, on the right, we have a picture that kids drew after the events of 9/11. So as the attacks were happening, what researchers found is that when the kids who did drawings of the Twin Towers and of the survivors actually helped these children cope with trauma more efficiently. The kids who witnessed 9/11 on television, who were there when it happened, who saw it on the news, who heard it from the adults, were better off and were more protected from the residual effects of trauma when they drew. So drawing was a cathartic therapeutic effect for children. And these are interventions that we can incorporate into training with biofeedback and neurofeedback. Now, you learn capabilities, how self-efficient you think you are, and how confident you are that you can overcome adversity is very important. And overprotected children will be more likely to be traumatized because they are not allowed to be provided with the skills for survival. They're expecting somebody to come save them. And it's quite true that kids who are overprotected tend to have not fare that well down the road. They tend to have more mental illnesses, more physical illnesses down the road than the kids who were not overprotected and were given the chance to learn resilience on their own, or learn resilience because the environment demanded that from them. The picture on the right is about a U.S. soldier, and this back when the Philippines kind of had their insurgency. And this is a U.S. soldier teaching a Filipino soldier how to cope with torture. So they were teaching the soldiers from the Filipino army to cope with torture should they be captured by the insurgency. So they were preparing them to endure not only the physical pain, but also the psychological consequences. Therefore, learning how to expect the best, but be prepared for the worst is very important. Now, the reality is not everybody who comes to see us will have these things available through them, through genetics or through the environment. Many of them will struggle because they didn't grow up in healthy environments or were taught to deal with adversity. And our experience, sense of capacity to meet danger is also very important. And again, internal means it's what we have internally, genetically, neurophysiologically, psychophysiologically, and external is what the environment provides for us. Again, this goes to show that not everybody will have internal or external skills that allows them to survive trauma more efficiently. Now, it's important to understand that as we work with trauma, we're going to be working with 4 dynamic elements of the trauma that will occur at any point during the intervention or in the person's life. Some of them will be more salient than others, but people will experience and probably cycle through these 4 components throughout their lives. One being hyperarousal, the other one being constriction, the other one being dissociation, and then freezing, which we also call immobility or helplessness. As I said, your patients will exhibit some more than the others, but it's likely, very likely, that we'll experience all 4 of them. Hyperarousal is anything that has to do with your psychophysiology, how your body responds to the stress response. So how your body manifests that you have trauma, that you're undergoing a stressful response. Increased heartbeat, increased heart rate, shallow, fast breathing, sweating, low peripheral temperatures, increased skin conductance, mu brainwaves, the alpha marker at T6 on your EEG. All of these are physiological responses to the psychological components of the trauma. And we can measure them, we can assess them, and we can train them, we can optimize them with biofeedback and neurofeedback. So that's the good news, that biofeedback and neurofeedback use technology to enhance the healing response. And that's something that traditional psychotherapy cannot do, although traditional psychotherapy may be important. That's not something that psychometric testing can do, although psychometric testing may be important. And interventions like brain spotting and EMDR, to some degree, provide a felt sense of those. But the biofeedback and the neurofeedback with the technology makes the process more visible to the client, and it helps enhance through the training of that response. So constriction means that the client is suppressing the event. They're suppressing the trauma, and people suppress traumatic events for different reasons. 1, because they don't feel that people care about them. 2, because there's a stigma associated with it. Or 3, because people don't feel that the trauma or what they underwent is necessarily traumatic and is not related to their mental and physical health. Nonetheless, as people suppress, things get worse over time. And one of the beautiful things about working with biofeedback and neurofeedback is that it helps facilitate the process of letting go. It helps release the energy from the trauma in a safe, connected way. So it ensures that the process of trauma release is not aggressive, it's not intense, and it facilitates the transition from being traumatized to feeling empowered down the road. Dissociation is quite common, and we can see markers in the EEG for dissociation. We can see the person going into extreme alpha brain waves, having new brain waves in their EEG. We can see that people, heart rate variability drops, their temperature goes very low, their skin conductance goes very high. There are ways we can measure dissociation, and we can train to break that dissociation. Because dissociation is one of those components of the trauma response that is very difficult to target, very difficult to treat, very difficult to change if we don't have a clear measurement of what it looks like for the person. We can then look at a brain map, we can then look at a stress profile, and that gives us a more accurate measure of what it looks like. Then we can bring all the interventions that we can bring together to help the person move forward and empower them more efficiently. Normally, when people are dissociated, they report feeling flat affected or shallow inside. They start lacking empathy for other people. They feel disconnected from the real world. They don't understand people's joy. They don't understand people's happiness. It's a problem usually with the mirror nerve system in the brain. And the other key aspect is that they feel depersonalized. They feel that they're out of their own body. All of these things have psycho and neurophysiological fingerprints that we can look at and we can understand more efficiently. Helplessness is also a big one. I see that very frequently with my trauma clients, my trauma patients. They usually come feeling helpless. They usually come feeling that there's nothing anybody can do for them. And if your experience is anything like mine, it means that many of your clients will be trying neurofeedback and biofeedback often as a last resource. They come and tell me, look, I've tried everything that I can think of. I have tried psychotherapy. I have tried brain spotting EMDR. I have tried acupuncture. I have tried ayahuasca. I have tried many things, and this is not really helping me. I'm going to try neurofeedback, biofeedback. This is my last resource. This is the last time I'm going to attempt something. And many times we can help these individuals. Now, I'm not saying here that neurofeedback and biofeedback are necessarily better than any other of those interventions, but what I'm saying is it facilitates the healing through those interventions as well. So combining other interventions like EMDR, brain spotting, psychotherapy, hypnosis with biofeedback and neurofeedback is better than doing either one alone. And one of the most beautiful outcomes that I have, most wonderful outcomes that I have when I'm working with these individuals is that they feel hope. When I do a brain map and I explain to them that they're not broken, that they're not crazy, that they did not deserve this, that they have a chance, it provides them with the hope that they need. And hope is a very, very important element. It's a very important part of the therapeutic process. Neurofeedback helps them with that. Biofeedback helps them with that. And it happens because oftentimes after the first biofeedback session or the first neurofeedback session, many people notice dramatic improvements. And they start thinking, oh, I can heal. I can get better. And that's a beautiful gift that you can provide for people. Now, when we're working, it's also very important from a psychophysiological, neurophysiological, cognitive, affective perspective to work with the orienting response. Because that means that once the trauma or traumas take place, the client, the patient will be conditioned to orient and gravitate towards the things that remind him of the trauma. It sounds counterintuitive, but it is what happens. People tend to orient one way or the other in different degrees, in varying degrees, to what is causing that trauma response or what reminds them of a trauma response. In a way, it's as if the client, the patient, is attached to the trauma. So it's a form of Stockholm syndrome with trauma response, where the client hates how they feel, but at the same time, they feel attached to their trauma and they feel that they cannot live without it. And that makes sense in many ways because it's how they have learned to survive. Let's remember that traumatic events shape the person's perception of the world. And to them, the world no longer feels safe, no longer feels trustworthy. When that happens and you have wired your brain in such a way, it's very difficult to break away from that. And that's one of the things that we work very hard at doing with these interventions. And we can work them with different psychophysiological signals or psychophysiological measurements, such as your heart rate, more specifically your heart rate variability, your skin conductance, your temperature, your EEG, your muscle activation, your respiration, and so on and so forth. And what this means is we can work with these signals individually, but also we can combine them, meaning we can show you how your whole body is reacting to the stress, both psychological and physiological, that the trauma is creating for you. And once you can see that, you can get a clear picture that is, you're not making it up, that you're not crazy, that you're not trying to get attention. All the stigmas that society provides. This helps you understand yourself, and it helps you understand that you can heal, that you can move forward, that you don't have to be a victim anymore, that you can be empowered and live a happy, productive life, whatever that means to you. And again, with the intervention, we integrate both dimensions, the physiological and the psychological, and we integrate it into this one extremely useful intervention package, if you will. We can teach you how to look at your own physiology and how to voluntarily manage it more efficiently. And then that allows you to voluntarily manage your thoughts, your cognitions more efficiently. This is not about control. This is about how you manage, how do you utilize your inner resources. How do you tap into that healing response that we all have, into your healing talent, and how to use it efficiently by looking at your physiology and by understanding your emotions and your thoughts. When you combine that, there's nothing that can really stop you. And that's when the healing takes place. And we can also document it, which is one of the most important elements here. Heart rate variability is one of those psychophysiological variables that I enjoy using. It's cost effective, it's very simple to use, but it's very powerful. And heart rate variability has tons of research that supports its efficacy in trauma, PTSD, and other conditions. But since we're talking specifically of trauma and PTSD, heart rate variability has a very strong impact. And heart rate variability, again, is about getting the heart and the brain to communicate together. In trauma response, there's a disruption in the effective communication between your brain and your heart. And that disruption brings about negative consequences for you. You feel depressed, you feel angry, you have flashbacks, you dissociate, you have problems trusting people, you have nightmares, you start drinking alcohol to deal with the pain, you start using drugs to numb the pain. But with heart rate variability biofeedback, we can restore that relationship. And we can, as a matter of fact, help you heal more efficiently. This is a case of one of my patients. It's a male client who worked in construction, and once during a construction work, he witnessed a very horrible accident where somebody got killed using some machine. And as a consequence of that, he had a hard time going back to work and using this machinery because it's what killed one of his friends and co-workers. And what I did was record his EEG, which you see at the bottom here, and then the EKG, which is a heartbeat. I was interested in seeing the relationship between his heart and his brain as a consequence of the trauma. So with the technology, I can document that relationship. And what we see here in the yellow peak over here where the green arrow is this tracing of brainwave activity. And this is called new brainwaves. So he's presented with new brainwaves, which in the topographical maps show like this. It shows a yellow peak, and then it shows as a green dot here on the map of the brain. And what I understood is that for this client, new was the common denominator and was the most salient presentation, which means it was presenting with strong dissociation. One of the things that kept preventing him from healing from his trauma and going back to work efficiently was that he was presented with strong dissociation, which is understandable. If you witness a friend of yours die in a horrible manner, well, you think that you're next, and obviously you're going to detach from it. The problem is that detaching from it, dissociating, disconnecting from the experience only puts you in a trance-like state that doesn't help you out. And it becomes a vicious cycle when you are anxious and then you dissociate. You're anxious and then you dissociate. So you're not truly breaking away. You're just escaping. You're avoiding and escaping in your mind and in your body. What I did then was I started teaching him some breathing exercises, some very simple breathing exercises. And I was recording his EEG here. So in the blue box, you can see the mu waves. This wavy morphology is the mu waves. And then I asked him to engage in the breathing exercises that I taught him. And after a few seconds of studying the breathing exercise, you can see how the mu desynchronizes. Mu disappears. And it means that we're helping break the dissociation. So the breathing exercise that I was teaching him is impacting his brain activity positively. And we know it because we're documenting it. We're recording this in real time. And then I'm able to see the changes in his brain, in his body over time. As I break the dissociation, now I can start incorporating the psychotherapy more efficiently because I now know that it's less likely that he's going to dissociate during the therapy session, which means that the psychotherapy is going to be more effective. And then I can further teach him skills to cope and heal. And we do this for as long as we need to. The important thing here is that we're seeing evidence that this does work. Other forms of biofeedback that we can use to further enhance this heart-brain connection and heal trauma more efficiently are temperature biofeedback, and galvanic skin response or galvanic skin conductance biofeedback. Your temperature will measure the blood flow into the periphery, so that means the tip of your fingers, and the skin conductance will measure the amount of sweating. The colder your hand is and the more sweaty, the more clammy your hands get, it means the more anxious you are. And you're reacting to something, which many times is the consequence of a traumatic response. Conversely, if your hand gets warmer and your skin gets drier, it means you have better coping mechanisms. And the reason why temperature biofeedback and galvanic skin conductance are so effective in the treatment of trauma, anxiety, depression, and all of the conditions that you see listed here is because they're targeting the sympathetic branch directly. Your blood vessels and your sweat glands only receive innervations from the sympathetic branch. And that means that no matter how much you engage the parasympathetic branch, if you're not disengaging, if you're not calming down your sympathetic response, your temperature and your galvanic skin conductance are not going to get better. And that means the mind-body relationship is going to be the opposite of what we want it to be. That makes the training of temperature biofeedback and skin conductance a little bit more difficult than usual. But once the person gets to understand that if they let go, if they live in more of a mindful state and they disengage the sympathetic branch, they can then start rewiring the brain in a way that allows them to be more resilient. Not only resilient to the trauma they're experiencing now, but very likely more resilient to probable future traumatic events. As the person gets empowered, the next time they face a life or death situation, they're going to have the resources that they didn't previously have, and they're going to be able to cope, and the chances of being re-traumatized are going to be greatly reduced. And as the picture shows, you can show somebody how their body's reacting in real time, and they can use that information to exercise control of that, exercise efficient management of that, and optimize and strengthen and reinforce the healing. Now, neurofeedback we can also use, and neurofeedback is strictly related to brain training. Okay, so we can train your brain waves. Once we do an EEG, once we do a brain map and understand how your brain is working, we can help you and teach you, train your own brain to heal, to rewire it, to become more empowered. And neurofeedback involves the placing of electrodes on your scalp. It's a non-invasive process. Nothing is going into your brain when you do neurofeedback. We're not injecting any substances. We're not administering shocks or electricity. We're just taking the information from your brain, feeding it back to a computer so you can see an image and you can react accordingly. You can shift your activity depending on the information that is presented to you in real time, moment to moment, minute by minute. By doing that, then you can rewire your brain activity. You can transform the way your body, your brain is connected and feel better. What that means is when somebody has had enough trauma, their networks connect in a way that helps the person survive. Not live, just survive. Get by just going through the motions during those difficult situations. But sometimes going through those motions means you get dissociated, you feel helpless, and that's not healthy. Neurofeedback helps brain understand that it can rewire itself, it can create new connections where you can live at peace, where you can be calm, where you can be self-regulated, where you don't have to be hyper-vigilant all the time. And at the same time, you have the ability, you have the confidence that if something happens again, you will be okay. That now you have the resources. And to give you a specific example, this is a male client who also underwent a traumatic experience. Now, we are measuring from a region in the brain called T4, and I'll show you in a second what it means, which is a region of the brain known as the insula. And we also have lambda waves happening occipitally. Lambda waves in the occipital region means we have somebody who's very likely traumatized and who is very hypervigilant, so somebody who's extremely hypervigilant. We did a treatment plan, which included doing a CZ-T4 bipolar biofeedback neurofeedback training. And what that means is we placed an electrode here at the vertex and one electrode here at the right temporal lobe. And we're teaching this individual to get those brain regions to communicate more efficiently. Now, we started doing the neurofeedback, and normally I do a brain map, a QEEG brain map at the beginning of the intervention as a baseline. And normally I remap every 20 sessions. However, the individual was curious to see if he was experiencing any changes from the brain level. By the 10th, 12th session, he told me, I'm feeling somewhat better. Can we do a brain map to see if there's anything changing in my brain? I said, yeah, of course. So when he came for his 13th session, we recorded and we can see that there are differences. Now, what the client reported was that he was feeling less reactive, more calm, less depressed. And very important as well, the spouse reported, she reported that there was a noticeable reduction in verbal abuse. That goes to show that not only the clients, but those around them in their environment are noticing the difference as well. And this is very powerful. And this is the pre and post raw EEG from this individual. So this is at 13 sessions, and this is a nice open recording. This is the T4. This is the activity that we wanted to target. You can see he's got a little bit of EKG artifact, the heartbeat, because he also has a cardiovascular condition, but also some of the lambda waves present in the occipital lobe. But we focused on training the T4 region, the right temporal lobe, because that's close to the insula. Look at the way it is before and look at what's happening after 13 sessions. And if you look at the overall EEG, you can see that this EEG looks more stable. This is a more stable brain. This is an optimized and stabilized brain pattern. And that's the reason, or one of the reasons why I should say, he is noticing those changes and his wife is noticing those changes. When we map it, we have it at the same sensitivity, at the same gain. And this is the alpha pattern that he was presenting, affecting the insula, making him very reactive, angry, verbally abusive. And after 13 sessions, you can see a significant reduction in the red. This brain is getting it. This brain is saying, oh, I can let my guard down, but I can still be protected. And the client now starts thinking, I don't have to be angry. I don't have to be reactive. I don't have to be upset. I can now feel that I can control my anger. And the wife was actually obviously very happy as well. So this is to show you that we can document that the intervention is working. This provides the objective measurement, the changes in the brain. And when we talk to the client and their loved ones, those in their immediate circle and environment, we can also get documentation, subjective documentation of the changes. The spouse, the teacher, the parents, the significant other, friends, co-workers, anyone who knows the person well enough can attest to the changes the person experiences through biofeedback and neurofeedback. So this is just to show you that we can document it, we can evidence it, and this goes into the published research. Now, this is very good news for us in the neurofeedback field. It's very good news for you, for those of you who are interested in being part of this wonderful world, learning how to do biofeedback and neurofeedback. This is a recent article that says the FDA clears neurofeedback for interventions for PTSD. Now, it's significant because once you get FDA clearance, it means you're strengthening the evidence in what you are doing. I've been doing neurofeedback for trauma and PTSD for many years, and I've seen the results. I've seen the transformation in hundreds of individuals. And so have my colleagues around the world. But now we have this from March of this year, quite recent, in which the FDA cleared this PRISM device. Now, I'm not familiar with this device specifically. We use different amplifiers. But the good news is that FDA now clears neurofeedback for PTSD. That's a huge gain because it means that the data has amounted to be enough. The data now matters, and now we have the support of organizations such as the FDA. So now when clients say, where is the science? You can show them the science for trauma and PTSD. And I think that's excellent news because this can help us provide more credibility in the work that we do and give the client and the patient more confidence that this is going to work for them. Now, as usual, if you're interested in learning about biofeedback and neurofeedback, I would invite you to talk to the one and only, the great Kelly Feely from Successful Practitioner, who would be more than happy to talk to you. You can schedule a free 25-minute consultation with him, and he will explain to you what the course is all about. We have some upcoming trainings in September. I will be in San Antonio teaching some of these classes and co-teaching some of them in September. And we also have a series in November. You can visit the website successful-practitioner.com, or you can email Kelly at this email address and book a 25-minute free consultation. I suggest that you do because Kelly is great and he's very thorough and he will explain everything and he will answer all your questions to the best of his capacity. With that, thanks everyone. Have a good evening over there. Good weekend too. Talk soon.